My guest today is award-winning author Mark Kurlansky. A former playwright, he worked as a foreign correspondent from 1976 to 1991. He was with, among others, the International Herald Tribune and was based in Paris and Mexico. Mark reported on Europe, West Africa, Southeast Asia, Central America, Latin America, and the Caribbean. This established the reference points for over a dozen books, which he often illustrated himself. In addition, he has been honored with several prestigious awards. We will begin with his latest book, The Food of a Younger Nation. I'm pleased to introduce to all of you Mark Kurlansky. Mark, welcome to the show.
Thank you. Nice to be talking to you.
Thank you, Mark. We're going to start right in, and I'm going to ask you about the subtitle of your book. It describes the parameters of the work. Could you tell my audience that subtitle? Or would you like me to read it to them?
I don't remember it word for word.
Okay, I thought you might have your book in front of you, but we'll go from there. It's just a wonderful subtitle, so let me read it. It's called, the subtitle is A Portrait of American Food Before the National Highway System, Before Chain Restaurants, and Before Frozen Food, when the nation's food was seasonal, regional, and traditional, from the lost WPA files. Well, that's what it is. So, and it really does explain it all. But tell my audience exactly what the WPA was and the time frame in which it existed.
Yeah, well, after Franklin Roosevelt was elected president, it was a very different time than today. There was a charismatic Democrat who was elected, replacing a very unpopular Republican at the outset of an economic crisis, and he wanted to have an economic stimulus package, which the Republicans opposed. Where things get a bit different is that rather than passing individual programs, Roosevelt got a bill through Congress which allotted a budget to create lots of small projects.
Yes, and that was called the Works Progress Administration.
Well, the Work Progress Administration was one of the things under this bill.
Exactly.
The Works Progress Administration was never voted on by Congress. It was created by a presidential order with the authority given in this initial bill. And under the WPA, also by presidential decree without Congress's vote being needed, the Federal Artist Project was created, which employed people like Mark Rothko, and the Federal Theater Project with Orson Welles and Joseph Cotten, and a music project which gave free concerts under the direction of the conductor of the Cleveland Symphony, and a Federal Writers Project which employed almost 7,000 writers throughout the country in state-by-state projects.
And was that in the 30s, the start of that in the 30s?
1935.
Yes, exactly.
And the thing that the Federal Writers Project was best known for was its guidebooks. A woman named Catherine Kellogg came up with this idea because there were no guidebooks to America. The only existing guidebook in America was a Bedecker's Guide in 1909, written by a Brit. And it's kind of a typical American thing. It's always been true that Americans tend not to look at America very carefully, and all the great books about America are written by people like Alex de Tocqueville. And during the Depression, there was this feeling that we ought to start examining the country. So they started writing guidebooks, very socially oriented guidebooks. And they did guidebooks to all 48 states and most major cities and even some small towns. And these guidebooks were a tremendous success. These leading literary critics gave them rave reviews. Some were bestsellers. Some of them are still in print and still fun to read.
Yes, and I have a wonderful one that contains beautiful photographs of the period. And the whole idea of doing that was to help these artists and to give them some kind of pay, or it was probably in many cases more like a stipend. Is that not correct?
Well, they would get salaries, but they were very meager salaries. But it was enough to barely live on. And to qualify for the Federal Writers Project, you did not have to show any kind of proficiency in writing. You only had to show that you were broke.
Yes.
So there were a few notable writers, some of the stars from the Harlem Renaissance, like Claude McKay and Zora Neale Hurston, and some writers who later went on to become major American writers like Ralph Ellison and Nelson Algren and Saul Bellow and Richard Wright and John Cheever, Kenneth Rexroth, the beat poet.
And there are examples of a lot of these writers in your book. I do think it would help the audience to understand that you were doing research on an earlier book, Choice Cuts, an anthology on food writing in the Library of Congress, where you made an extraordinary discovery. Describe what you found and what it consisted of.
Well, initially, there was a book that was published by the University of Iowa Press. And what it was Nelson Algren's essay on Midwestern food, which he wrote for a project called America Eats, a Federal Writers Project that was never published. And I thought that was pretty interesting, and parts of it were pretty good. And I checked with the Library of Congress, and they said, yeah, we have boxes and boxes of this stuff. And what happened was, after they finished the guidebooks, the next project they were going to do was going to be an examination of food in America, of social gatherings and types of food and ways in which food was eaten and food traditions. And the book was largely going to be these 5 large essays, of which the Nelson Algren one was one of them. But to write these essays, all of these 6,000, it was actually down to about 5,000 by then, this was 1939, 1940, writers were asked to just send in information about food. And some of them sent in recipes, and some sent descriptions of gatherings, and some sent poems, and some short stories, and all kinds of things. And most of this stuff was never going to be published. It was just going to be used to inform these 5 essays.
So there were loose documents that you were dealing with, and
yes, completely unedited. What happened was that in December 7th, 1941, the Japanese bombed Pearl Harbor, and everybody knew that World War II was coming, and it was going to be the end of Roosevelt's New Deal, and no more WPA, no more Federal Writers Project. So Catherine Kellogg, a lot of the letters and correspondence of this project were also in these boxes in the Library of Congress. Catherine Kellogg on December 8th and December 9th sent out all these frantic letters all over the country, the Federal Writers Project, saying, anything you have on this America Eats project, just send it in now. We'll try to do something while we're still operating.
Well, and wasn't it grand that she did that? Otherwise, those documents would have been lost.
Yeah, and she never was able to do the project, and was fired soon after that. And she just took all these manuscripts and dumped them in the Library of Congress.
Well, good for her. Now,
and yeah, because today they're just really a treasure. They're probably more interesting than the final book would have been for us today.
Well, I'd like you to, we have so much to talk about, and I would like you to tell our listeners about the period of the Great Depression. It's certainly now being compared to our economic crisis, but the country itself was quite different then. Can you paint a picture of that America for us, that you found, a brief picture of that you
Yeah, well,
found?
it was a country it didn't have a big highway system. There wasn't much in the way of air traffic or freight. And so it was a country of distinct regions and distinct local cultures, so that food and accents and a lot of other things changed not only from state to state, but from county to county. This was true to some degree even after World War II. When I was growing up in the 1950s in Connecticut, Connecticut's a very small state. I could tell what part of Connecticut somebody was from by their accent.
Exactly.
There were very distinct local cultures from one place to another, and people ate local food, and they ate food based on local traditions, and there was a different cuisine. In much the same way that today, people go to France and Spain and Italy and enjoy the different cuisines in the different regions. America was a country like that before World War II.
Now, what criteria did you use in sifting through these documents to present the authentic picture of the time that you did? Because you're really caught up in the book and get right into a feeling that you're there. So how did you make that determination through these thousands of documents? How did you make the selection?
I wanted readers to have the experience that I had. When I started looking at these manuscripts, I felt like I'd fallen through this hole and magically landed in 1940, this very different time, and I wanted readers to get that sense also. So I picked things that said something interesting about the time. Some things that were well written, other things that weren't, but said interesting things.
And you were very successful in doing that, because you do sift through everything the reader does, and going from a little note about something to a longer work to a recipe to what's going on in somebody's backyard, and that was very successful. You divided the country into 5 well-defined sections in the book.
Well, they did. I was following their formula.
Yes, that was going to be my question. It did follow how the FWP classified the works.
And because it was government.
Right.
So they broke up the country along the exact lines that the U.S. Census Bureau operates.
Mm-hmm.
And so sometimes this made sense and sometimes it didn't. The Northeast is a region that includes Pennsylvania, New Jersey, and New York in with New England, which certainly no New Englanders recognize that as a region.
Yes, I was raised in New England, and I was thinking the same thing when I read that. And,
right, and the South. Interestingly, the South kind of ignores the Mason-Dixon line and recognizes the fact that places like Maryland and Kentucky have culturally more in common with the South, even though historically they don't. California was broken up. Northern California and Southern California were in different regions. There was, Texas went with the Southwest and not with the South as it traditionally does. But this is just, how the government divides up the country for doing census.
Yes, exactly. It's interesting it was done that way, but for our listeners, it's divided into the Northeast, the South, and it's clever the way you have them listed. The North eats, the South eats, the Middle West eats, and the Southwest eats. Prior to the Southwest, I think we missed the Far West. But
the Far West,
yes,
right.
Exactly, the Far West. I'd like to talk about the first section, which is the Northeast, as you said, that includes New England. And I was very interested in that section. It brought back a lot of memories for me. The fun discussion was the fact that New England argues about who makes the best beans and where clams are found and all of that. And I wonder if you have a favorite example in that section, a food tradition or a recipe found in the Northeast region that you'd like to talk about.
Well, several. It's it's very hard for me to think of it as one region. There's a great recipe from Maine. It's a chowder recipe, and you cook up the pork fat and potatoes and then you can add the clams or the fish and the milk and these things. But this was during the Depression, and she says, if you don't have any of that stuff, you can just stop right there and call it potato
chowder. That was one of my favorites, too.
And I've tried it. It's a great recipe. It's a wonderful soup.
Well, it is. And I remember my mother and my grandmother making that. And when you talk about using the pork, it was really salt pork that they used. And,
right.
And as they said, tried it out. In other words, letting it fry until you had the grease. And that's what gave us the marvelous flavor. And I certainly can understand why you might have trouble remembering certain things, because there are just so many examples of these 6,000 and more documents that you found. It's a good example of your work in that your work has been described as involving history, anthropology, politics, culture, economics, science, food, and culinary history. And this book offers up very pleasant memories and feelings of nostalgia. I know it did for me. I'm sure you mentioned that it did for you as well, remembering why every Saturday my mother made baked beans, because that's what you do in New England.
Right.
But then there's other parts of the book.
Although I'm not sure that people still make baked beans.
Oh, not anymore.
Yeah.
Oh, no, they're all in cans now.
Right.
Well, I still have the bean pot, but just as an example of what our family used to do. But in the book, at the same time, the mindset of a non-segregated era is unsettling. What specific writings, if you can recall, did you include in certain regions that might have generated that response from you? Pardon me, from you, because you make mention of it in the book with some of the writings.
As I say, when I was going through this stuff, I thought I felt like I had accidentally landed in 1940, and when I was going through the Southern manuscripts, which was probably the largest section, a lot of Southern manuscripts. And suddenly I realized, oh, that's right, this is pre-Civil Rights South. And a lot of these manuscripts were very racist. My first reaction was, well, I'm not going to run any of these. But then I realized that it's against the whole idea that I had,
Absolutely.
Was to, show what it was like for better and for worse. So there's a lot of things in the South where there's a lot of very racist descriptions of African Americans, and there's, people being interviewed that are described only first name, comma, a Negro, and the dialogue between the white person and the black person really has this aura of slave and master, and very disturbing in some cases.
Well, that's why it's such a wonderful history, because let's face it, there are perhaps younger people out there that aren't totally aware of what it was like and we could never really understand what it's like, but I think it gives a good example. At the same time, what you do is to show some of the wonderful foods that were made and are part of Southern history as a result of that.
Yeah, the Federal Writers Project had a very strong anthropological component, and they did this incredible thing. There were still in the 1930s a lot of people alive who had been born slaves. And the Federal Writers Project went around and did taped interviews of them called slave narratives. And when this project came along, they went back to these sources and got food things from them. So there's a lot of really interesting black Southern traditions. They also did this with American Indians, and there was a project to interview pioneers. There were still people in the 1930s who had gone west in wagons, and they had interviewed them, and they got food things from them, and there was a very anthropological side to all of this.
Yes, there was. And if we can just remain with the South for a minute, because as you said, it's one of the larger sections. First of all, was there any particular recipe or tradition in that section that you enjoyed and tried out?
Yeah, I mean, one of the things that struck me was a woman named Dora Ramsey describing food in eastern Virginia along Route 1. And at one point she says, if you're not finding good local specialties along the highway, just go up and knock on any door and say, I want to eat some Eastern Virginian food.
I remember that that
and
stood
I thought,
out.
well, that's a different country.
Well, the other things that they did, too, when things got bad, they welcomed anyone who came to their house and offered to work for food. And there was always, if they had it, it was shared with these people who might have just gotten off of a local train, trying to find work, trying to earn a little living. And you bring that out just beautifully in these writings. One of the things that I thought was fun, did you enjoy the description of the Alabama cane grindings and the candy pullings? I thought that sounded like fun.
Yeah. I mean, all these kind of social gatherings all over the country, the black chitling struts and the thresher, the banquets after threshing the fields in the Midwest, and these kind of social gatherings, almost more than recipes, are what we've lost.
Absolutely. When you talk about the thresher parties, that was another one of my favorite. My husband's family were farmers, and they worked the farm back in New York State. And he always talked about, when he was a little tiny boy, the huge tables that were spread out in the field, filled with pastries and wonderful dishes made by the whole town. Would come out to do that, and the wonderful things that he had that were lost and he couldn't experience again. So we've lost something very important.
Right. Not and the food, the difference with the food is that most of the food in here you could find now, but you have to be a real detective to find it. But, I've done a lot of call-in radio about this book, and, people from all over the country have called in and said, oh, yeah, my family still does this or still does that. But, in 1940, this was the food of America, and now it's kind of obscure, out of the mainstream stuff.
You're right, and that's why it's fun if you can go back and find these old cookbooks and see exactly what went on. One of the other sections, one of the other traditions in the Middle West section was the Minnesota booyah. Am I saying that right? The booyah. Do you remember that that document? That you could tell us a little more about it. I have the book here with me, so if you can't remember, I can certainly go to the book and find it. But do you remember anything about the booyah? I'll give you a hint. It's been described as somewhere between a soup and a stew. That's
right. Yeah, with chicken.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah, and originally a Carolina tradition, I believe, and there's also in the southern section they also have this.
Well, yes, the thing that was interesting about in Minnesota is the fact that it's a big outdoor feast in June, popular in communities where it's largely a German population, which was interesting, but it's also strictly a male affair. It's the men that actually do the cooking. They don't even the women don't even peel a potato, as it says in your book, but they all get together and enjoy it afterwards and serve beer. And they started at dawn, including oxtails, veal, and chicken. And then from there go on to add the vegetables, and your description in here is so incredible. I was really hungry by the time you got through with this, but it's a little tough for either of us to make this recipe, Mark, because it's a recipe for 60 gallons, so I don't think we could
I liked
do
about it.
I did too. But didn't you feel hungry after reading some of these recipes?
Right. A number of recipes in the book are like that because they're for huge gatherings.
Yes.
The recipe from Virginia for Brunswick stew is huge.
So was that one of your favorites also?
Yeah. But it called for squirrel, and the squirrel they were talking about was flying squirrel, which doesn't actually fly, but it leaps from tree to tree, and was found in uncut Appalachian forests, of which there are not many left. Consequently, there's not many flying squirrels left.
Well,
there's a lot of things in this book that have greatly disappeared. Abalone was the signature dish of San Francisco, and is now rare. And cod and Atlantic salmon and sugar maples are getting to be, because of climate change and acid rain.
I remember the sugaring it's interesting because I was such a tiny little girl, but I remember that so well, going out with the family and the neighbors and doing that and collecting the maple syrup and going back and
right.
making the candy and
you could mark this event on a calendar year after year, and now it's kind of uncertain when the sap's right because of climate change.
And you mention in the book too, in some cases they can't even get the syrup. It's at certain times, even though it's the time of year when it would ordinarily happen. As you said, it's disappearing, and I think
it's kind of frightening when you look at this
yes.
book and you realize how much has been lost in 70 years. 70 years is not even a lifetime.
Absolutely. I think that's the thing that affected me the most, among other things. But yes, what is now gone from our life and can't be recaptured. That's why it's so important that a book like this has been done.
Yeah, Americans tend to forget about their traditions, and it's a good thing to remember them every now and then. And, it's interesting because there's a lot of food movements now that are really talking about going back to the kind of world that's in this book. But of course, in 1940 it wasn't a movement. It was just, it was what was available.
And that was the way everyone cooked. You're referring also to what they're calling the slow food movement now, as opposed to fast food.
And regional and local and all of these movements today are really trying to get back to what there was in 1940. Of course, it wasn't all good. You had to spend September and October canning food and putting up food to get through from November to April because there wasn't much produced.
I would like to add some other things that's very important about your work. And so I'm going to take a minute to summarize a few essentials about Mark's work. Beginning after your first book, A Continent of Islands, about the Caribbean, came out in 1992, you went on to publish in 1997 your award-winning book, Cod, a biography of the fish that changed the world. It was an international bestseller. It was translated into more... I'm so sorry. We have allergy season here today, Mark. I apologize for that.
We have nothing but rain here.
Oh, well, you probably feel the same. But your book was an international bestseller and was translated into more than 15 languages. It received the James Beard Award for Excellence in Food Writing, the Glenn Fittich 1999 Food and Drink Award for Best Book. It was a New York Times bestseller and was chosen by the New York Public Library as one of the best books. To research your 2002 book, Salt, A World History, you traveled from China to the Middle East, from Africa to Scandinavia, finding its story from early BC up to the founding of Morton Salt. You went on to write the history of New York through the story of the Big Oyster, History on the Half Shell. published in 2006, and of course now your latest work, Food of a Younger Land. It struck me as an amazing feat. What influenced you, and I'm sorry that we have so much to talk about, but have to do this briefly, to pursue such unusual yet highly successful topics?
Well, I mean, I just write about things that, if they interest me and I think they're important, and I think they're a good story. It has to be a good story because that's the only way I know of making a book work, is to have a good story.
Did your career as a journalist help in this way? Were you working in the same manner of moving from one subject to the next to complete whatever the story was? And in this case, it was cod and salt and
well, I suppose
oysters.
that's true. I never really thought about it that way, but as a journalist, I did jump around a lot, and I tend to write for all sections of the paper, just like I write for all sections of the bookstore now. I mean, I wrote, foreign news and politics and economic stuff and cultural stuff and food and
well, I would
even
like
sports occasionally. So.
Yes, but also most important too. Well, they're all important, but I want my listeners to know that you were awarded the prestigious 2007 Dayton Literary Peace Prize for a book called Nonviolence: The History of a Dangerous Idea, with a foreword by the Dalai Lama. How did you feel? Again, I have to ask you to be brief, but how did you feel about that winning that award, and what did that do for you individually as a
Well,
person?
I loved winning that award. I mean, I love the idea of winning a peace award because it's a major theme to me since the Vietnam War, which I opposed and refused to serve in, and it's something that I spend a lot of time on, opposing war, and I think this is an important book showing how underrated and how successful in history nonviolence has been and how unsuccessful violence has been.
Well, you're to be congratulated on that, and there's very few people that have won any kind of peace prize, and I have not read that book, but it's going to be my next book. Mark, I want to thank you so much for being here. The books are tremendous. I'm reading 3 of them at one time right now.
That's how I write them.
Well, I get that feeling, and I've loved having you, and I hope you'll come back again to talk about your future works. It's really been lovely. Well, thank you, and thank you so much, Mark.
Nice talking to you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.